I'm Joanna Matson for KLTV. Today I'm going to be chatting with former Northland farmer and now Rangituki candidate for New Zealand First, Rob Stevenson, ahead of this year's election. Why did you decide to get involved with politics?
Yeah, politics has always been a passion of mine, sort of helping people or looking. I think I'm a bit of a solutionist at heart. If I find a problem, I'll try and find a way to fix it myself. I can transplant a motor into a vehicle, or always looking to learn about something. And I realised that I had a bit of an affinity with helping people, and so decided to pursue it. I actually stood for the regional council last year locally and missed out. I've been helping Winston Peters out for around about 2.5 years since the Northland by-election, and that's really just encouraged and fostered the passion, I guess.
What do you see as the strengths of New Zealand First over other parties?
New Zealand First is obviously a patriotic party, and it's something I'm very passionate about, is looking after New Zealand and New Zealanders first. It's all in the name. And I think there's been a lot of research done, and we have, I'd encourage people to go and have a look at the website. There's some very, very sound policy. It's about New Zealand being productive and making its way in the world, moving back away from the neoliberalism, I guess you could say, to what made New Zealand top of the OECD on so many levels back in the early 80s. And I think the drive is to get back to that place again. We don't want people sleeping in the streets, and want everybody engaged in being a productive New Zealand that we can all be proud of.
You say New Zealand First is the only party with farmers and provincial New Zealand at heart. But what policies are in place to back this up?
Would have seen in the media the royalties for the regions program, so 25% of any resources that are mined or what have you out of the public assets get returned as a royalty to the region from which they were extracted, and then that money can then be used to help those regions, to boost those regions economically. Yeah, well, the other thing, of course, that you would have heard Winston say about the regions is the GST from the tourism going back in to help the local governments fund things like toilets and different amenities, which is vital. I mean, $12 million over the last year or so is not enough to build many public toilets when you see we're getting $1.4 billion in GST out of New Zealand's tourism. And the other thing with the farming, on the farming side of it specifically, I think research and development and something really near to my heart that I've developed a bit of a system around is the biosecurity issues. In the last 8 years, we've had over 140 biosecurity incursions. People have heard about the ones that have made the headlines, the myrtle rust, the velvet leaf in the South Island coming through in seed, and then of course, just in the last couple of weeks, the mycoplasma bovis down in Canterbury. And I mean, these things are only a step away from something really harmful to what is the core of our economy, essentially. We have tourism as a driver, but our primary sector is what drives New Zealand, and that's what we've got to really start looking after.
What would be your biggest concern for New Zealand if you had to pick one? And how would New Zealand First address this?
That's another one that's near and dear to my heart. I think our youth disengagement and unemployment is probably the biggest factor that we've got in New Zealand. I think the last count was 92,700 people between 16 and 24 not engaged in employment, training or education. One of our MPs, Derek Ball, introduced a bill called the Yeti Bill, Youth Education Training Initiative, which, to prosee it, is a program about identifying at-risk youth in the high schools, at a high school level, before they're 15, and then putting them into a military supervised, not into the military, a military supervised training program where they would go into it. It's a live-in program that spend the first 4 to 6 months learning about how to live, the opportunities that they hadn't had at home. They would be given a taste in a series of trades that the military can offer, chefing, mechanics, building, for example, and they'd be paid the minimum wage right through this 3-year course. with a 4% loading put on top of that into a compulsory savings scheme. So when they graduate from the 3-year course, that they'll have a nest egg. But the course itself would involve them getting all their driver's licences up to class 5, as I said, the taster, and then they would pick a trade that they wanted to get into and spend the rest of the 3 years completing that trade. So they come out before 18 as a work-ready, disciplined, productive asset for New Zealand society. It's I really have. It's a fantastic bill, and it's something we really need to push. That's the trade side of it. On the university side of it, Winston came out and announced the tertiary education policy, which, in a nutshell, is when you complete your university degree, whether it's 3 years, 5 years, or 7 years, that you bond back to New Zealand, and so that would mean that on a 3-year degree, you would need to spend 3 years working in New Zealand, and the government would pick up the tab on your studies, on your student loan. So, and the same, 5 years, 7 years, the same thing would apply. And there was also if you went out into the regional New Zealand, there's further encouragement that it would be paid back at a faster rate. So that's two fantastic policies that I'm wrapped in about how we can get youth re-engaged in society and how we can help them progress.
Immigration has always been a key platform for New Zealand First. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it has. It's over immigration, I guess, Joe, is what you were referring to, and the immigration we've had lately. I mean, it came out to over 72,000 net immigrants in the last 12 months. That was up to June. You only have to drive through Auckland to see the effect that we're having on the lack of infrastructure. But it's not just the roads. That's probably what people typically notice. But our hospitals, our schools, our core services are all just really straining under the pressure of keeping up with this increase in population. I think it's something like 70% of the new immigrants come into Auckland, and what we need to do is to wind that back. Our infrastructure at the moment just can't keep up. We need to bring back skill-based immigration, and through those bills that I've talked to you about that we're looking at is get our 92,700 young kids and the other people that are unemployed into productive sectors of society. Immigration is not the answer. You would have seen it reported from Winston probably that immigration consumerism is driving our GDP up around 3%. Well, that's fine. It's certainly not sustainable. We see that New Zealand needs to get our productive sector and export sector to pick up the slack on that, and by making and helping and assisting these unemployed people to be part of that, plus giving companies tax incentives to, one, take on the unemployed, and tax breaks for research and development that will further help boost the economy, is where we need to be.
So Rob, you're standing for Rangitikei. Can you tell us a bit more about your connection to the area?
It goes back quite a long way. My great-great-grandfather was, it's not quite in the Rangitikei, but he had a store in Woodville. Then his son had a store in Otaki, which is also just outside the Rangitikei electorate. And that was when they decided that Rangitikei was the place to go. So his son, my great-grandfather, became the postmaster at Taihape, and was there for a long, long time. Another grandfather was on my dad's side was the government surveyor based at Ratahi, and he did a lot of surveying work on the Raurimu spiral railways all around the bridge to nowhere. But the great grandfather John, he was captain of the Ratahi Mounted Rifles, and as generations passed, my mum's a Taihape girl, so we used to go down there on holidays, get regularly. That and my year's study in Palmerston North, which is not quite Rangitikei, but it's the hub down there. And Dad worked around the Rangitikei on some of the big stations after he graduated from Smedley Station in the Hawke's Bay. So Yeah, it's just a passion for the area. I've still got an uncle and cousins farming down there, so on the farm that was my grandfather's. So it's going to be nice to get back down there.
Rob, and finally, what's the message you want to give the people of Rangituki?
Make New Zealand first your party vote. If there's anything that I want to get across, that would be it. Make New Zealand first your party vote, and let us help you make New Zealand progress again.
Thanks, Rob. For more interviews and your latest election news, head to our website or grab a copy of the latest Kaipara Lifestyler.